Hi, welcome to this episode of Buys News.
Yeah.
Today with me, I have my good friend Aubrey Thompson.
Hey, it's me, Aubrey Thompson. Advice News.
Aubrey, would you like to introduce yourself
Yeah.
to the people that may not know you?
Of course. My name is Aubrey Thompson. I don't know, I'll do pronouns. Sure. I use she, her pronouns. I am a theater major, fourth year, and I'm excited to be on Vice News. I'm pumped. This is great.
Awesome. I'm glad to have such willing friends.
such such willing and artistic friends. Yes, this is incredible.
Yeah.
You have a very incredible setup. There's like gears and little steampunk switches and valves everywhere. It's very articulate.
You don't have to lie. You can say that you're recording this in my room.
It's like the Batcave in here. It's really elaborate. Okay.
Well, appreciate it.
Okay.
Anywho.
Does everyone know who you are, Joe? Do you need to introduce yourself?
I should introduce myself. This is the first episode after all.
Yes.
My name's Joseph Gilman.
Yes.
Native-born Colombian, first generation American.
Yeah.
And I'm here to do this podcast because I found that these two key issues in our country need to be discussed more. And I figured, what better way to discuss more than to just talk about it with my friends,
Yes.
so that they can be informed. And then once they're informed,
We can fix it
we can fix it.
single-handedly.
Well,
Yeah.
we're not gonna fix it.
I
We
think-
can't fix this, but
I think if with enough elbow grease, I think we can really put these issues to bed, as it were. I think so.
you know what? I like your positive
Yeah.
attitude towards it.
Yeah, like bootstraps.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Every time a Republican says you should pull your bootstrap up, this is what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
this
yeah,
podcast.
yeah, of course.
Anyway,
Okay.
That's enough messing around. Let's introduce today's topic, which is drugs and addiction. Now, Aubrey, what do you know about drugs and addiction?
Yeah, I think the way we advertise, particularly like nicotine in the past, has been so strange in America. Like you look at like old cigarette commercials and you see like doctors being like, "This is safe to use. It helps your heart," and like they kind of just talk out of their rear, as it were. They sort of just they sort of just made up whatever they needed to make consumers feel safe with these substances that are addictive. And until very, very recently, in the grand scheme of things, like there wasn't any like warning on these products to be like, hey, this is an addictive substance. If you use this, you will develop, it is highly likely you will develop an addiction. And I think that's particularly prevalent nowadays in like younger people with like vapes. And I might sound like I might sound kind of old man yells at cloud about this, but like I think it's very deliberate. The flavors they use, the colors they use, they make it look very fun. They make it look kind of cool to like get these elaborate new. They don't just have like mint. It's always
Yeah.
like
It's like Crazy Melon or like
yeah.
strawberry lemonade, stuff like that.
I think it's very, very deliberate on their part to make this a new thing, a like healthier quote unquote thing. I think that's sort of what vaping has been touted as, is like a healthier alternative to smoking cigarettes.
Do you think it's healthier? Like, if you were to compare somebody that smoked 8 packs of cigarettes a day versus somebody that smoked, I don't know, their babe constantly, like nonstop.
Yeah.
Who do you think at the end of the day is more likely to be like sent to the hospital for like a medical emergency?
I think when we get down to brass tacks, vaping is to at least some degree healthier. But I do think that it should not be an excuse. I feel like it's very technically healthier. Like it feels, because cigarettes have tar and they have more harmful, harsh chemicals in them, but that doesn't mean that vaping also isn't detrimental to your health. I think it's just sort of like a would you rather get punched in the face or shot in the face? And it's like, well, obviously I'd rather get punched in the face, but I could also just not do either.
Well,
and be great.
let's say this. Let's come up with a hypothetical. Let's say you're
Uh-huh.
walking through the street and you see somebody hitting their babe. What's the first thing that goes through your mind? Is it just, man, look at this douchebag just hitting their babe in the middle of the street? Versus if it was the same scenario, but the person was holding a cigarette instead of a babe.
That's the issue. Cigarettes look cooler. And I think that's just true. Like, we see that in media a lot too, which I think is also playing into it. Like, we see cigarettes so much in so many facets of our lives. Like, we see it in shows. I was watching a show recently with you and another friend. Like, the characters just kept smoking. Like inexplicably, all the time, out of nowhere, they just started smoking a lot. And it's like... And also, like, that goes into, like, seeing, like, your favorite character smoke. Like, that might make you more inclined to smoke than you would otherwise. I think it all plays into the same thing. Like we see smoking so much in, like, old cowboy movies and, like, old gritty noir movies with, like, with a suave detective smoking a cigar or a cigarette under, like, a street lamp. Like, it feels very, very deliberate. By these massive industries, by these big tobacco companies.
I would agree, Aubrey. The reason I bring this up is because something that we talked before in my class is stigma, and specifically the stigma relating to the consumption of drugs. So I'm going to ask you the question, which I thought was the most interesting from the class, which is, what do you think is most responsible for drug addicts, themselves or society? Like, if somebody's addicted to drugs, is that society's fault or is that their own fault?
I think it's both, but I think the real question is, like, which contributes more? I think, like, man, that is tough, because, like, obviously society has a big factor in influencing you to start smoking or start doing heavier drugs. We can talk about, like, meth or, like, heroin. Like, seeing that societal pressure and that influence definitely has it plays a massive part in that. But I do think there is some level of personal responsibility too. Like, me personally, I've had the responsibility to not do any of that, to not partake in any addictive substances. And
right, I feel like we're, like, taught from from a young age, don't touch these substances, don't do drugs. And it feels like, to a certain degree, it's just obvious. Like, we know very well what will happen if we start doing heroin. Like, if I pulled out a needle right now and started shooting up, like, we both know that this is not going to end well. Not just for me in this exact moment, but in the long run, that's just gonna lead to a whole bunch of, like, health and mental issues that come with these drugs. But there's another question within this, which I think is also interesting, which is, how do we deal with drug addicts that are addicted to drugs that aren't illegal? Because when you talk about, like, heroin or meth,
that's
or
illegal,
ketamine,
so
like, if those drugs are illegal, so somebody's addicted to them, you go, oh, well, that's their own fault. I mean, they had to go out of the way to go and acquire those things. Those aren't, like, sold in the stores. But then there's alcohol and nicotine, and now in Seattle we have weed. So what do you think about people that are addicted to these commercially
like
sold, like, substances? Because they're not doing anything that society just says is bad, because they're buying these things.
They're not breaking overconsumption and addiction to those substances is not breaking any law in itself.
Right, exactly.
That is true. But I think that can lead to laws getting broken, like DUIs, like we see a lot of abuse in households from alcoholic parents. So that can lead into more severe laws being broken, but that in itself is not breaking a law, which I think is where, like, interventions come in, where people in their lives need to be vigilant. I think I think on that level, when it is a legal substance, looking out for someone, being there, noticing that they're doing this a lot, and saying, hey, I care about you. I'm not trying to, like, say that, you're less of a person because of this, but, like, I think you need help. Like, I think this is a problem.
You would say that it is partially the responsibility of the people surrounding these people to take action.
I think that I think that's a hard thing to say. I think like I wouldn't blame the family of an alcoholic father for him being that way and being like, "Oh, why didn't you tell him sooner that this was happening?" Because there are so many different things in play. Like you could be scared to confront someone, you could be afraid of their reaction. If they're a violent person, like that can play into it too. But I do think like if it's a friend and it's someone that you trust and that you trust that they will respect your opinion on that, I think you should at least try. I think we can all at least try if you see that happening. As hard as it can be, because it's not easy. It's not easy to turn to a friend and say like, "Hey, you're hurting yourself. You're doing something that's damaging to yourself." But I think we can all do a little more.
And wouldn't you say that since drug addicts are well aware that their drugs that they're taking are breaking them, like they're making them unhealthy or they're damaging their own bodies. So if you saw somebody hitting themselves like in the head with a baseball bat, you go, that person is got something going on mentally. Like you don't know exactly what it is, obviously, but something's clearly not right. Because if a person's intentionally hurting themselves, that's a clear sign of some kind of mental like battle going on within them.
Yeah, that's the crux of the issue too. Is like this goes into like mental health issues too. Like we don't see that. Like when someone is beating themselves over the head with a baseball bat, you're like, okay, they're hurting themselves. They need help. But if you see someone like doing a drug too much or like having severe mental health issues, like it's less obvious. It's less easy to point to them and be like, this is a problem. Especially if they're high functioning. Because I've known people in the past who, with weed specifically, like they very, very clearly have a dependence on it, but they're still able to function and be a person. And it's like, where's the line with that? It's like, yeah, am I overstepping by saying, like, I know you're able to function, but this is still an unhealthy relationship? Like, what's the line there?
That's interesting. So you're saying that it is possible, because it is possible, because some people can be completely dependent on that substance and still function perfectly fine.
Yeah.
So at that point, do we do anything about it? Like, do we have to do anything about it? Because at that point, we're just messing with our lives, right? Because we remove that drug, that dependency, then suddenly they're gonna unravel. Like, you're just crushing them in a way.
It's a very, very delicate thing, and it's a case by case basis, I think, and that goes into like personal responsibility too. Like, there's only so much we can do for someone. They need to recognize that in themselves and be willing to help themselves too. Like when it comes to interventions and like Alcoholics Anonymous and all of these other support groups, they need to want help. Like if they don't want to get better, they won't. And that's particularly true with like legal substances. Because illegal substances, you can just, you can turn someone in and they'll have those substances forcibly, removed from their access. But,
okay. So I think we've gotten a good idea of what your stance is on both legal and illegal drugs when it comes to recreational drugs. But now I would like to shift our focus to something else. Pharmaceutical drugs.
Oh, okay.
So, pharmaceutical drugs. I don't have to explain it to you.
Yeah, like opiates. Yeah,
exactly. Opiates are the most, I think, easy example for this because, people are very much addicted to opiates. Like, the fentanyl crisis is insane in America right now.
It's a huge, huge deal. Yeah.
So, do you think that pharmaceutical drugs should be treated with a higher regard than, recreational drugs?
Yeah. I think we give those more credence because they have that air of professionality with, like, a medical professional prescribing them. And I think also it's difficult because if you use them as prescribed and you don't abuse them, they can have benefits. Like, there's a reason they're prescribed. There's a reason they're pharmaceutical drugs. It's because they've shown to help. But once you cross that line and once you grow that dependence and continue to take them even after you don't need them, that's when that falls to the wayside. And I think that has a lot more personal responsibility than like other drugs. I think having a prescription, having that pretense of, okay, you're going to take this here, this will help you, and choosing to give into that dependence, I would say you have a little more personal responsibility there.
Yeah.
But it's difficult because you
say that, but like those people didn't ask for those drugs. Like most people addicted to
That's tough too.
opiates
Yeah.
weren't actually like seeking opiates at the start.
That's
they
true.
were given opiates for some kind of disease or disability or something, and then they were just stuck with them because they didn't know that they were gonna get so addicted to them.
That's true, and I think that's on the fault of the medical provider. I think they need to be clear that this can be an addictive substance. Like I think it should be. I think it's irresponsible to just give someone a drug that they know has the potential to be addictive, and not at least give them the choice. I think we need other alternatives than these drugs because clearly it's becoming a huge issue, and I think. It, at the very least, being transparent and being like, hey, we have a drug that could help you. It has the potential to be addictive. Be aware of that. I think would go a long way.
Yeah.
And also just hopefully in the future we can develop drugs that can help that aren't as addictive. But that's pie in the sky, you know.
Yeah.
that's just dreaming.
That's hopeful thinking.
Yeah. But at the very least, being a little more transparent. Yeah, absolutely. And then at that point, you would have some personal responsibility. But it's give and take. It's a little bit of both.
What about non-prescribed drugs? Like, have you heard about Ozempic by any chance?
Of course I have. Yeah. And that's like a drug that isn't inherently addictive, but people take it for other reasons. They take it for weight loss, primarily, even though they are very aware that it's not healthy weight loss. They'll still do that anyway.
Are you aware that Ozempic's actually a drug supposed to fight diabetes?
I was aware. I remember seeing ads for it, like on YouTube. I would see like the Ozempic, and it was like a diabetes medication. And I didn't give it a second thought. I was like, okay, cool. I don't have diabetes. I don't have to worry about that. But now it's become this massive industry almost.
Now, do you know what happens when a person without diabetes takes diabetes medications?
Probably not great things. It's probably what happens to anyone else who takes a drug they don't need. It will have adverse side effects, I presume.
You would be very right. Yes. People that take Ozempic that don't need Ozempic, like all these, celebrities that we know, they have to have a very, very specific diet because otherwise their liver is literally going to stop functioning.
Oh, that's great. That's healthy. Yeah.
You can just imagine the healthy body of a person with completely normal blood sugar levels when suddenly somebody stabs himself with a needle that just makes their blood sugar spike up.
And that's true. Yeah. Because it's meant to counteract lower blood sugar. Right. So it's spiking those levels. Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's scary. Ugh. Yeah. I just think that we should try to lose weight in a healthy way. I don't know. I feel like at the very least getting some exercise. Like there are better ways to take care of yourself than pumping yourself full of drugs you don't need. But
sadly, however, we live in a society where it really has been sold to us the idea that every single problem has a magical pill that can solve it.
That's true.
And it's just how the pharmaceutical industry in America works.
Yeah. And diet culture too is a huge thing in America, particularly in women. Like if you're struggling and you have like a slow metabolism, like you might consider taking Ozempic, even knowing it could harm you, just because like there's so much pressure societally to look a certain way, especially if you're a woman, and like having to cater to those standards. It's like it can be suffocating, and that's the saddest thing of all to me is like knowing that you're hurting yourself, but doing it willingly because you want to look a certain way or feel a certain way about yourself.
So you would say sad. That the biggest issue in this is the stigma surrounding all these problems.
I'd say so. I mean, maybe not the biggest issue. I think the biggest issue is probably the harm that's being done to the people.
Sorry, biggest issue besides the potential harm brought to people that do these substances. Yes. Yeah,
I think we have a lot of stigma around addiction. I mean, especially in Seattle. I mean, you look at Third Ave, and it's people on Instagram will take like cropped videos of homeless people on Third Ave and be like, "Oh, Seattle's a cesspit. Oh, Seattle's a drug-laden wasteland," and it's like, why aren't we approaching these situations with any sort of critical thinking? We're not looking at this as like, why are these people like this? We're looking at this as like, these people are like this. They're scary. They're gross. I don't want them around me.
would you say that the society has kind of considered these people filthy in a way?
Oh,
Like they're
absolutely.
dirty?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like we see. I mean, I come from Portland, and we also have a massive homeless crisis going on in Portland. And this is anecdotal, but I remember being in the car with my parents and my dad. Every time we pass a homeless person on the sidewalk, he'll like scoff and be like, "Oh, there's so many of them nowadays." And I'm like, "Dad, you're talking about them like they're like bugs or like cockroaches or something. Like these are human beings. I don't know. I
Okay.
it's scary. There's a huge lack of empathy.
It is.
Yeah.
That's a different issue entirely, though. About
Yeah.
like
Oh, absolutely.
the
Yeah.
big holes in our social safety net, or where they even exist anymore. Honestly.
Absolutely. And I mean, I don't want to get super political right now, but I think the current administration we have is not at all interested in bucking those stigmas for these people. And that is,
Rough.
yeah, I think the most we can do as people is just try to show a little more empathy on an individual level and just hope that that's something, because until we on a larger scale, until our government on a larger scale wants to help these people, there's only so much we can do as individuals. And that's been the hardest thing of all, I think, is recognizing that we can't, contrary to what I said at the beginning, we're not going to single-handedly fix all of these issues. It's just something that we need to tackle bit by bit.
Yeah.
And it's hard.
There's a message of hope in there, though, and I think that's a good
think so.
place to leave this off.
I think so.
Thank you very much, Aubrey, for
Yeah.
coming into my podcast.
Thanks for
and
having me.
Being a willing participant in my social experiment.
Of course. Of course. This has been Vice News.
Thank you for the outro.